Rabbi Lehrfeld, David Mendelsohn, Rabbi Nimnichbadim, ladies and gentlemen. There was once a British Airways aeroplane flying from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv to London Heathrow. While the plane was flying over the continent, the pilot came over and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to tell you that the whole of London is covered by a blanket of fog, and as a result we'll be flying to Manchester International Airport, and from there we'll be providing buses for all of you to get to London." Immediately after the announcement, an air hostess noticed a chassid, a pious Jewish man, dipping his hand into his overnight bag, from which he took a small black book. He opened the book and he started to sway backwards and forwards as he read from its pages, and she thought to herself, "This man thinks that his prayers are going to lift the fog." 20 minutes later, the pilot came over and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have good news for you. The fog has lifted. We're flying to Heathrow as planned." So the air hostess came up to the chassid. She said, "I owe you an apology." He said, "Whatever for?" She said, "You know those prayers of yours?" He said, "No, those prayers are mine." She said, "Come on, don't be so modest." "Those prayers were incredible." He said, "No, they weren't incredible." She said, "Your prayers did it." He said, "No, my prayers didn't work." She said, "Would you like to explain yourself?" "Sure," he said. "You see," he said, "those prayers of mine, they were not prayers of supplication. They were prayers of thanksgiving. You see," he said, "I live in Manchester." So, ladies and gentlemen, this evening, let's engage in some words of thanksgiving. Thanksgiving to the Almighty for 30 glorious years of Baron Hirsch Synagogue here in this complex, as part of 155 monumental years of this incredible, world-renowned community. And for me, it's been such a treat. This morning, Rabbi Lehrfeld took me around the building to see the facilities here, and Valerie and I are so much looking forward to Shabbat here within this community. What a great complex. What a wonderful community. And then Valerie and I would like to offer some words of thanksgiving to Rabbi Lehrfeld and Rebbetzin Lehrfeld for hosting us in such a gracious and welcoming way, and yashar koach to you for your wonderful, inspirational spiritual leadership of this community. We'd like to thank David Mendelsohn and his board for hosting us in such a lovely way and for the great way in which you are leading this community. To David Fleischhacker for his help in arranging this trip. To the Coopers for their kind hospitality. And coming to Memphis provides us with a wonderful treat to see yet again our wonderful family here, David and Linny Mirvis. So we would like to thank you, and there's such a marvelous atmosphere. There's a ta'am. There's a kind of a taste of Baron Hirsch, which I can best explain through the following anecdote. For Rosh Hashanah last year, Theresa May was the very first British Prime Minister to invite leaders of the Jewish community of the UK to 10 Downing Street for a reception in honor of the Jewish New Year. It was a wonderful event. The Prime Minister gave a lovely address in which she praised the Jewish contribution to life in Britain over the ages. And in reply, I mentioned to those present that I'd once heard an anecdote from Yehuda Avner, who was an expert on the prime ministers of Israel. He related how in 1947, just a year before independence, David Ben Gurion was invited to the official residence in Jerusalem of the British High Commissioner. During the course of a hot summer's evening, in the midst of many guests at a dinner there, the High Commissioner noticed Ben Gurion taking his jacket off and perching it on the chair behind him. The High Commissioner took a piece of paper out of his pocket, he scribbled a message, called a waiter, asked the waiter to take it to Ben Gurion, and Ben Gurion read the message, which read, "Mr. Ben Gurion, please have respect and put your jacket back on." So Ben Gurion turned the piece of paper over and he scribbled a message. With a waiter, he sent it back to the High Commissioner, And High Commissioner read his message, which read, "Dear High Commissioner, I have permission from your Prime Minister to keep my jacket off." Well, that having been said, the evening proceeded. At the end of the evening, Ben Gurion came over to his host to thank him, and the High Commissioner was upset. He said, "Can you explain to me, Ben Gurion, how it is possible that my Prime Minister in London has given you permission here in Jerusalem to sit at my table without your jacket on?" "Sure," said Ben Gurion. "Earlier this year, in January, there was an international conference on the Middle East. I came to London, there were negotiations, there were talks, and while I was there, I had the honor of being invited to 10 Downing Street for dinner. In the course of the evening, there were many people there. I stood up, I took my jacket off, and I perched on the seat behind me. The Prime Minister noticed what I had done. He took a piece of paper out of his pocket and he scribbled a message. He called a waiter who took the message over to me, and this is what I read. Mr. Ben Gurion, when you are in Jerusalem, you can do as you wish. But here in London, put your jacket back on." So yes, we are used to pomp and ceremony and formality, and in many respects it continues to be the norm in Britain of today. But how lovely it is for Valerie and for me to come to a community where everybody's just so relaxed, so warm, so friendly. Makes no difference what, jacket, tie. The ikar is friendship, warmth, the fact that people get on together in such a lovely fashion. It's palpable. We feel it. It's tremendous. And the warmth of your hospitality is enormous. And therefore, there is so much to celebrate here this evening. And how privileged I am to be associated with this evening's tribute to Rabbi Rafael Grossman ZTL, and how moving the tributes to him have been this evening. And for me, it's so touching to recognize a legendary impact of a rabbi on his community. And I also recognize the extent to which Rabbi Grossman's impact has gone well beyond Baron Hirsch, well beyond Memphis, and he has touched the hearts and minds of thousands of Jewish people right around the globe through his teachings and his messages. But the best way that I can encapsulate his role as rabbi here is through the words that time and time again Almighty God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alehem." Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them. On dozens of occasions, this is what God said to Moses. Why speak to the children of Israel and say to them? What's the difference between speaking and saying, and why were both necessary? Daber implies speaking with authority, speaking from the pulpit, speaking to give guidance with regard to law. Amira, that's conversation. That's how to chat with people. And what God was saying to Moses was, if you're going to be an outstanding spiritual leader, you have to be gifted in both dibur and amira. You need to know how to speak to the people as an authoritative leader, and also how to chat with them as a friend, as somebody who's genuinely interested in them. And a suitable and appropriate and successful Rav is somebody who speaks with authority from the pulpit and who's also everybody's friend, who knows how to talk genuinely with others about politics, about sport, about the weather, about everything that's happening in their lives, and to engage with them on these subjects, not because he heard somebody advising him to do so, or he read it in a textbook, but because he genuinely cares. And that's exactly what we've heard about tonight through the legendary leadership of Rabbi Grossman here within this Kehillah. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, he had that skill of dibur and amira, a great orator and a personal friend to Mary. And it is as a tribute to him that this evening I want to speak about what makes a community great, because that's exactly what he achieved here in Baron Hirsch. And this is a challenge that we have today throughout the Jewish world. And I believe that there are 3 key ingredients towards transforming good communities into great communities. And this is presented to us in the Ethics of the Fathers. Al shlosha dvarim ha'olam omed, upon 3 things the world stands. Al Torah, v'al avodah, v'al gemilut chasadim. upon Torah, which is Jewish education, avodah, everything relating to services and the community, and gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, of generosity. And I believe those are the three ingredients upon which a successful shul stands. First of all, Torah, Jewish education. There are quite a number of terms that we use for this building. One is Beit HaKnesset, house of gathering. And indeed, the Greek term synagogue similarly means house of gathering. Beit Tefillah, that's a house of prayer. But colloquially, more than any other term, we say shul, from the German meaning school. That's because historically, schools existed within a shul building. But today, it sends a message to us. Learning must be right at the center of a successful community. The Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah, the teaching of Torah, transcends all other operations that we have within a community. It is a truism. The more committed a community is to the study of Torah, the more committed its members will be to Judaism. And the prospects for lifelong commitment to Yiddishkeit will be all the greater. But it depends on how we teach Torah. We have to teach it in a way that's suitable for our age, for this generation. You know, the Hebrew word for year is Shana. Already we're starting to greet people with Shana Tova. Have a good year. Shana comes from the word Shinun, which means repetition. As you have in the Shema, V'shinantam levanecha, teach by rote, repeat and repeat. That's because you're in and you're out. There's repetition. It's always the same months, the same seasons, the same timings. Within the year, you have months. And the Hebrew for month is chodesh, from the word chadash, that which is new. Through the month, we see a renewal of life. Chidush, change. Within the Shana, which is always the same, there must be room for chidush, for doing things differently in terms of presentational styles. And in order to guarantee that our congregants are captivated by Jewish messages, that they're attracted by a Jewish way of life, we have to use chidush, presentational styles which match our generation within the context of the Torah, which, like the year, never changes, because it is valid and relevant throughout all ages. And what is the way for this age? It is lo mitoch yir'ah, ela mitoch ahava. Not through fear, but rather through love. Not to insist that our children and our students must abide by Torah law, because if they don't, they'll be punished. But rather, if you don't, you're missing out on something which is life-enhancing and transformational for you. You'll be all the poorer without it. The very last mitzvah of the Torah is to write a Sefer Torah. Sima befihem. God said to Moses, write this song. The Torah is called a shirah. It's a melody. It produces joy in our lives. V'lamdait b'nei Yisrael, teach it to the children of Israel. Sima befihem, God said, put it in their mouths. Why not in their hearts? Why not in their minds? Why put Torah in their mouths? Rav Dezler, in his book Michtav Me'Eliyahu, explains as follows. When you're feeding an infant, you put the food in a spoon and you play a little game, and then eventually the spoon will find its way into the child's mouth, and then the child must swallow it. The one thing you mustn't do is to force the food down the child's throat, because then the child will reject it. So too with Torah. We have to make it appealing, especially in an age where, at the press of a button in the palm of one's hand, one can be mesmerized by the most remarkable images before one. We have to up our game to guarantee that Torah education matches what is out there in the world and is even better than it, so that our children will open their mouths, will take it in, but God forbid that we should push Torah down their throats, because then they'll reject it. It must happen mitoch ahava, out of love, out of recognition that without Torah, our lives would be all the poorer. And that's exactly what you are achieving here at Baron Hirsch. Now, it's very interesting if you would ask the question, what were the two most significant building projects mentioned in the Torah? My answer would be the Tower of Babel and the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And when you come to think of it, actually, each one was the very antithesis of the other. With regard to the Tower of Babel, the Midrash tells us that if the builders, while building the tower, if they dropped a brick by mistake and it smashed to the ground, then all the builders would drop their tools, come to the ground, and they would sit and mourn for the loss of the brick. But if one of the builders fell to his death, nobody would bat an eyelid. What mattered to them most of all was the building and not the builders. When it came to the Mishkan, however, as Rabbi Lehrfeld said earlier this evening, God commanded us, "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham," make for me a temple so that I shall dwell in them. The most important part of the Mishkan and later the temple was the people who came into the building. There are two Hebrew words which are similar, binyan and minyan. Binyan is the building, minyan the people who come into it. And what amazing people you have here at Baron Hirsch, indeed making it into the warm, vibrant, and world-renowned community that it is. There are two different words for community in the Torah. One is Eidah, the other is Kehillah. Eidah is an assembly, Kehillah is a congregation. And what's the difference between the two? An Eidah is a group of people who happen to be in one place at one time for one purpose. They might never have been together before, they might never come together again. For example, the audience in a theater. That's an Eidah. So when you come into the Eidah setting, is it expected of you when you take your seat that you say, "Good evening"? Not really. But if you do, that's okay. And after saying good evening to the person sitting next to you before the show starts, is it expected of you that you say, "How are you? How are the children? How's work going?" That's somewhat intrusive. And if in addition to that you would say, "After the show, would you like to come to our house for coffee?" Well, that is highly suspicious. A Kehillah, however, is a group of like-minded people who've come together on many occasions in the past, will come together on many occasions in the future. They share their lives together in a very meaningful way. So if you come into a Kehillah and before sitting down you say Good Shabbos, oh, that's what's expected. And you'll get a lovely warm Good Shabbos in reply. And if afterwards you say, well, how are the kids, how's the family, etc., great. Pity that sometimes it's at a point in the service where maybe it's not the best thing to talk, but it's lovely within a Kehillah that people engage with each other. And if after that you say, would you like to come to our house for Kiddush after the service, wonderful, because that's what a Kehillah is about. There is a parasha of the Torah called Vayakhel. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Moses congregated the assembly of the children of Israel. He took an Eidah, a group of people of common descent who emerged loosely bonded from Egypt. That was an Eidah. And he transformed the Jewish people into a viable Kehillah by giving us a Torah, something we had in common, to enrich our lives together, and through which we would have a social experience second to none. Baron Hirsch is a great Kehillah, because this is where people enjoy coming to socially. It's where you have an enrichment of life within a committed Jewish context. The third pillar upon which great communities stand is Gemilut Chasadim. Loving kindness, charity. It's so important that people should be giving within a community, that we recognize the Ben Adam L'Chavero, our commitment to our fellow human beings as being an essential ingredient of our relationship with our Creator. In the benching, towards the end, in the concluding paragraph, we say some intriguing words. Na rayiti gam zakanti, v'lo rayiti tzadik ne'ezav zarom mevakesh lachem. I've been young, now I'm old. And I've never seen a good person forsaken and his or her children begging for food. You know, in some versions, it's in small print. In some families, they say this in an undertone in order not to offend somebody who might be around the table, who's having a tough time in life. But actually, that's because of a misunderstanding. What really are we saying here? It is as follows. Na ra'iti gam zakanti, I've been young and now I'm old. V'lo ra'iti tzadik ne'ezav, v'zarom avakesh lachem. And I've never just seen, I've never just looked at a person who is forsaken and his children begging for food. You see, the Jewish way in life is v'lo ra'iti. I don't just stand and look. If I see people who are suffering, if I see that there is a need, regardless of who those people are, I get up and I do something about it. V'lo ra'iti. I don't just stand idly by. Once I'm aware of something, I am responsible to deliver and to give of myself for the sake of others. And I'm so impressed here in Baron Hirsch to find a community where there are so many exceptionally generous families giving out of love to this community in such a wonderful, spirited manner. And that's how a community can thrive and can have a future, knowing that it can depend on exceptionally kind people. So here we have the three ingredients of great communities. Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. That's what Rabbi Grossman achieved. That's what Rabbi Lehrfeld continues to perform and to achieve and to do here at Baron Hirsch. And Baruch Hashem, therefore, it is here that you've excelled in making a good community into an extraordinary one. I'd like to conclude my address by just telling you a little story. So in Jerusalem, a man came into the offices of an insurance company. He sat down and he said to the lady, I'd like to take out some life insurance. So she said, that's very nice, but excuse me for asking, how old are you? He said, oh, I'm 84 years old. She said, well, I'm sorry, it's the policy of our company. You're 84 years old. There's no way we can give you life insurance at this age. He said, but it has to be possible. She said, why? He said, because my father came into these offices a few weeks ago, and he told me you gave him a policy. She says, your father? How old is your father? He says, 123. She says, well, I'll have to check with the manager. Can you come back tomorrow? He says, I can't come back tomorrow. She says, what's happening tomorrow? He says, tomorrow we have a family simcha. She says, what's the family simcha? He says, tomorrow my grandfather's getting married. She says, your grandfather's getting married. How old is your grandfather? He says, oh, 155. Wow, she says, what an age at which to get married. He said, no, think nothing of it. He wasn't so keen, but his parents insisted on the shidduch. Now, even with advances in medical science today, it's a dream to live for that long. But when it comes to kehilot, communities, great communities, extraordinary communities, even when you're 155 years, you're 155 years young, especially when you've got great spiritual and lay leadership, when you've got Torah and Avodah and Gemilut Chasadim with you. The sky is the limit as to what you can achieve and as to how long you will exist for. And my bracha for you is, may you go from the 155 years behind you and 30 years in this building onto incredible, great, and wonderful achievements in the future. And may this glorious community only go from strength to strength. Mechail El Chail. Thank you very much.